Hello everybody and welcome back to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about the shortest unit that we do, which is all about the history of life on Earth. So in our first lesson, which is also really brief, we're going to talk a little bit about how fossils form and what fossils are. So technically we already defined what a fossil was in the previous unit on evolution, but we're going to take a little bit of a detour and talk about how fossils actually are discovered, and then also what fossils are. So first things first, right? Paleontology is the study of extinct organisms, and so by default, it is also the study of fossils, because that's one of the key ways that we figure out what ancient organisms were like. Now, keep in mind, right, that all life pretty much will form a fossil. Plants form fossils, animals form fossils. Fungus will form fossils, and then also bacteria even form fossils. I think we talked about it in the previous unit, but also in first semester, right? That we have cytoskeleton. And so because cells contain cytoskeleton, they leave impressions still in rock when we're talking about fossilization. So here we go. You have an imprint, a nice kind of like pressing of a plant leaf. We've got ourselves here some wonderful hyphae from a fungus that have been kind of preserved. And then here we have the remains of a vertebrate animal. Keep in mind, though, right, that only a tiny percentage of organisms are ever fossilized because the conditions for fossilization are so specific, right? So in reality, we might only know a fraction of what was alive millions of years ago because only a small percentage of organisms are ever fossilized. So here's the next bit, right? In order for fossilization to occur, something has to be very quickly covered by something. And the two main things that kind of lead to fossilization are sediment and tar. Sediment being, essentially just microscopic particles, right, that form sedimentary rock eventually. And then tar is just kind of this thick, viscous, black sludge almost looking stuff. And both of those can be used in order to form a fossil. So these are the steps of fossilization. We're going to kind of define each one, but we've got, here a little crocodile looking thing. And the very first step is just death, right? So the organism has to die and it has to be buried. Not necessarily in that order, by the way. It can be buried and then die, but I digress. The second step is lithification, then petrification, and then maybe exposure. Okay, so here is the exact organism that we kind of introduced this unit with, right? It's, I believe, related to a coelacanth, which is a fish that is still around today. Okay, so step one, death and burial. What are we talking about? Organisms have to be very, very quickly buried. So again, with sediment, with tar. Those are our two main things. In lithification, the sediments basically squeeze all of the water out. Because typically, to be buried by sediments, it's a really wet process. And so through lithification, what happens, those sediments become compressed and compressed and compressed, and so all of that water gets squeezed out. And essentially what you end up making then is sedimentary rock. Petrification. Now here's where the actual fossilization is occurring here. So minerals replace the original organic material. So there's no real organic material left once petrification is completed. And essentially what you end up making then is a stone or mineral replica of what was there before, and that is what a fossil is. And that's why fossils are so resilient to the elements, because they're no longer really made from living stuff. And then finally you have exposure, And so these, very deep skeletal remains might get pushed up to the top by geological uplift, which could be caused by a convergent plate boundary, which we talked about in the last unit, or erosion. It could just be that, wind or glaciers or something expose now this to the elements. And as a result, now the fossil's back to the surface, and so people are aware that it's there. Now, that isn't always the case, right? It sometimes does this because a lot of times, it just sits there and we have to dig and dig and dig and dig to get it out. That is literally it for the first lesson. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But make sure you fill in this diagram, label it, and explain it in your notes.